This 6-second piece of footage is one of the most iconic images of the First World War. It's a moment from one of the most well-known battles in military history. This clip comes from a sequence in the 1916 documentary The Battle of the Somme, and since it was first watched by millions of cinemagoers in 1916, this film has been widely used on television, in print and online, and its footage has become synonymous with the First World War. This clip in particular, depicting an act of bravery and selflessness, has become one of the most iconic images from the Battle of the Somme, and made this man one of the most famous faces of the First World War. But more than a century later, one question remains unanswered. Who is he? Imperial War Museums holds this film in our archives. Over the years, we have been contacted and have received over 100 different names for the soldier in the film. So far, none of these leads have enabled us to definitively prove the identity of this man. However, by carefully examining the film frame by frame, we are able to learn a great deal of information about the details surrounding this rescue, and perhaps get a little closer to identifying the man from the film. The sequence begins with a title card reading, "British Tommies rescuing a comrade under shellfire. This man died 30 minutes after reaching the trenches." This is followed by a shot of two men carrying a wounded soldier through no man's land before crouching down, seemingly to step down into a trench. Following this is the shot in question, which is followed by a shot in a different trench of two more soldiers carrying a wounded man on a stretcher. This appears to be the same wounded man from the previous shot, with the same short hair and torn left sleeve visible in both. We cannot tell if the man being rescued in shot 1 is the same wounded soldier we can see in shots 2 and 3, but if we take the editing at face value, as most viewers of the film would have, this sequence shows us an injured soldier being rescued from no man's land and then being carried through the trenches to a stretcher. The first step in learning more about this footage is to look at the person who filmed it. Fortunately, we know exactly who this was. In June 1916, the War Office agreed that the Somme offensive could be filmed, and Geoffrey Malins was one of the two cameramen tasked with capturing footage of the battle. He was attached to the 29th Division, opposite Hawthorne Ridge, whilst John McDowell filmed the 7th Division near Mametz. Together, they captured more than 8,000 feet of film, which was used to create the Battle of the Somme documentary. At the time of its release, just a few months after the filmmakers returned home, it was seen by over 20 million people in Britain. In his post-war memoirs, How I Filmed the War, Malins describes filming the exact sequences we see here. "I filmed the rescue from start to finish until they passed me in the trench. Upon the back of one was the unconscious man he had rescued, but 20 minutes after these two had gone through hell to rescue him, the poor fellow died. During the day, these two men rescued 20 men in this fashion under heavy fire." Malin's description of events matches what we see in the footage, and the information contained within the title card is also supported by Malins, that the wounded soldier unfortunately died shortly after reaching the trenches. His testimony also gives us another vital piece of information. The man carrying the wounded soldier in the film was also one of the rescuers from the no man's land shot. But the next piece of evidence could call this into question. There was another man with a camera present that day. Ernest Brooks. He was the first official photographer to be assigned to the Western Front, and was working closely with Malins when he took this photograph. At first glance, you might think this photo is unrelated, a different man carrying out a separate rescue, but you would be wrong. Look closer. The wounded soldier on the man's back is the same man we see being carried in the film clip. We know this because we can see the same cropped haircut, identical tears to his left sleeve and a matching half diamond on his left shoulder, a red battle patch indicating his part of the 29th Division. So why do we have images of this same wounded man being carried by two different soldiers in different locations? Well, if we look closely in the background of the film clip, we can see the man from the photo. With this information, we can reasonably conclude that the man from the photo handed the same casualty over to the man from the film, who then carried him further through the trenches. The photograph was featured on the front pages of numerous national and local papers, and the man was identified in an edition of the War Illustrated on July 29, 1916. His name was Tom Spencer of the Royal Garrison Artillery, and was posted with a heavy trench mortar battery at the time of the rescue. A letter quoted in an edition of the Burnley Express at the time strongly supports the conclusion that Spencer was one of the two men carrying out the rescue from No Man's Land. We now know that after the shot in No Man's Land, the wounded man was carried by Tom Spencer, then the man from the film, then on a stretcher. According to Malins, the man seen in the film is also one of the soldiers from No Man's Land. This would allow us to identify the two men in shot 1 as Tom Spencer and the unnamed man from the film. However, from very early on, the identity of the rescuer in Brooks's photograph was contested. A rival claimant came forward in 1916 to say he carried the wounded soldier as well. Tom Spencer wrote to his mother after being informed of the challenger. About that fellow who claims to be the original in the photograph which you have seen in the paper. I know him, and he was with me when I brought that man in. If you have a copy of that photograph, you will see him holding on to the ankles of the wounded man. Tom Spencer is presumably referring to this man, who we can also see in Brooks's photograph. Spencer also confirmed that this is the same man who was with him when he brought the casualty from No Man's Land. So, according to Spencer, it was he and this man who were the two rescuers out in No Man's Land. We can attempt to confirm this by closely inspecting the footage, which shows one of the men is bareheaded whilst the other is wearing a helmet. Just as the sequence ends, you can see that it is the bareheaded man who is about to take the wounded soldier on his back. This would be Spencer, as we see in Brooks's photograph, pictured with the second rescuer who was wearing a helmet. But remember, Malins also stated that this man was one of the two rescuers from shot 1, and we know that there weren't 3 rescuers in No Man's Land. Is it possible that the man holding the casualty's ankles in Brooks's photograph and the man carrying him in the film is the same person? If this was indeed the man from the film, it is entirely possible that he could have taken off his helmet and coat before taking over the carrying of the wounded soldier. This would explain why there was a second person identifying himself as the man who carried the wounded soldier in 1916, because they both did. But the different camera perspectives from the two images make a useful facial comparison difficult. And it is just as likely that there was a third person involved at some stage of the rescue. It's also possible that the No Man's Land rescue we are shown is not actually the same rescue we see in the rest of the sequence. After all, Malins stated that they rescued 20 men in this fashion throughout the day, so it could be the case that footage from an earlier No Man's Land rescue was edited together with the trench footage to tell a cohesive story. In fact, it has been suggested that the entire rescue sequence might not have been real at all. It is true that some fakery played a role in the production of the Battle of the Somme documentary. This scene from the film, also shot by Malins, is confirmed to have been a reenactment, with soldiers performing for the camera miles behind the front line. But it seems highly unlikely that the rescue scene was also a reenactment, for a few reasons. Not only would it have required a great deal of coordination between Malins and Brooks for them to both capture, but it also would have required all of the soldiers there that day to play along as well, after the images were seen by millions of people back home. Furthermore, if this was a staged rescue, faked for propaganda purposes, why is the story that the man carried still died shortly after? Let's take a look at shot 3, where we see 2 new men carrying the stretcher with the wounded soldier. This man at the front could be seen in the background of shot 2 alongside Tom Spencer, and we've also been able to identify him. He contacted Imperial War Museums in 1964 after seeing the rescue film in a documentary, nearly 50 years after the events took place. He was Walter Henry Liddermore, who served with the Royal Garrison Artillery and was posted to the V-29 Heavy Trench Mortar Battery. Liddermore's identification as the man with the stretcher sheds further light on the events of the rescue, as he was even able to recall the exact date the events took place, July 1st, 1916. A date which is supported by the presence of the cameramen at the same time. The photograph and film sequences raise a number of questions that are difficult to answer, and whilst analysing the footage has enabled us to learn a great deal of new information about the rescue, the mystery still remains. Who is the man carrying the wounded soldier? The most interesting and most challenging issue is why so many people have contacted IWM in the belief that it is their relative in the film carrying the soldier along the trench. Only one claim can be correct. Interestingly though, one name has been suggested to us on 3 separate occasions over the last 15 years. Charles Brennan. What is interesting about this lead is that he is the only man we have so far discovered who was also identified in 1916. A newspaper article from the Sligo Champion refers to him by name as the man carrying his comrade along the trench. And whilst it includes very little information on Brennan himself, it does make clear that he was a gunner with a heavy trench mortar battery, just like Tom Spencer and Walter Henry Liddamore. Still, we cannot say with absolute certainty that this is the man's identity, and research is continuing in order to establish if Charles Brennan really is the man who appears in the film. What is it about these 6 seconds of footage that has inspired so many people to write to us? Whilst part of the answer can be attributed to the widespread visibility of the image on television and online, there's also something about the selfless, heroic act that draws people to the scene. Many simply want to give the soldier an identity, but it clearly goes beyond the removal of one man's anonymity, as it has inspired dozens and dozens of people to seek public and formal recognition. So far, none of the suggestions we have received have come with irrefutable evidence, and so the question of the man's identity remains a mystery to this day.